And welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to get into another old school cool video. This time it's another version of the Milwaukee S-114. This is a older variant than the last episode we looked at, and it's a newer variant than the first one. This one's in between the two, and we'll possibly get into more of that later. But this is a nominal 1900 RPM drill with a full load speed of 1,000 RPMs. It's not uncommon for this era. It's a 1/4 inch drill. At this time, you would order your drills for what speed you needed. This one being right around the 1900 to 2000 RPM speed. And they were very basic. This thing is corded, obviously. It is all aluminum housing. We buffed the whole thing up and did the red painting and cleaned up the trigger. The trigger does have a trigger lock, which it was very common for your older tools. It has a 1/4 inch Jacobs 7B chuck that we rebuilt with new jaws. You can see that closes to 0. It is field lubricated. You can take out that screw and get lubrication into it. We had the whole thing apart, and I was playing around with videos at the time. Not really making official videos or anything like that, but I shot segments here and there. Let's flash back in time and take a look at when we had this thing apart, and we'll be back. But we're starting to go back together here. We already got the brush holders and field in this thing. And you can see we painted the entire inside here with insulating varnish, painted our field with insulating varnish, and we were careful not to paint our bearing races or our brush holder area with varnish, but everything else is varnished. We got the coat of clear coat on the outside, got the switch housing here, that's all varnished as well. Now this is going to be a little bit more tricky to put back together. These are a little bit more got a little bit more to them. But before we go together on the rotor, get the rotor in here. So here's our rotor. Again, it's all varnished. Cleaned up really nice. Few observations here. These older rotor, the older drills, they use a bigger ball bearing. If you look proportionately, the bearing is deeper than the new bearings are. So that's something to keep in mind when you get into these. These are kind of an unusual size bearing. And the front here, that is a standard bearing size, so that one's not hard to get. In fact, I think I replaced this one. Little interesting side note. You can see here, the fan was actually made by Alcoa, which is an aluminum manufacturer in America. Here you can see some balancing was done on it. They just took a drill and drilled into it to balance it. Drill some out. Kind of interesting. But overall, it cleaned up really well. We masked the whole thing and varnished it. Worked out really good. We can see here it's 115 volt rotor. So what we'll do is we'll get this good and greased up, some nice fresh grease, and get that into our motor housing. Then after we get that in, this piece will go on. And this is something interesting that I saw. They actually pressed in a piece of steel for that bearing to sit in. So they put a steel race pressed into the aluminum. I don't know if you can see that or not. And that's where this bearing will go. That'll go on there like that. And then our gear, our drive gear, here, which looks like it's brand new. This thing really cleaned up nice. It's a 54 tooth. You can see the 54 stamped in it there. So this has a needle bearing, which runs on the shaft here. And then there's a thrust bearing also right here. So the gear face actually sits on the thrust bearing, and that's what helps you when you're pushing on the drill chuck. Here's our rebuilt drill chuck. When you push on the drill chuck in on it, that keeps everything from moving. Now when I got this drill, truth be told, this thrust bearing was not in it. So the only thing holding this from going in, because the needle bearing has no backing, was this needle bearing. So that really didn't work out all that well. So it was a good find on our part, taking this thing apart and finding that this thrust bearing wasn't there. Now you'd actually be able to use the tool. So there you can see thrust bearing. And the needle bearing just keeps everything aligned. It's not there for torsion. Okay, so now you can see we got the whole thing together. We got a new cord on it, and this is actually a new Milwaukee cord. We have a new chuck key for the 7B chuck. Most of these old tools don't have chuck keys when you buy them. It seems like something that gets lost. I'm not sure why, but it's what happens. We cleaned, as you saw, we had the whole inside apart. We varnished everything. Everything's cleaned up. New bearings. Bearings are packed with grease. Everything should be good. I think everything's adjusted properly. Everything makes good. We tested everything electrically. Switch is good. Everything works. This thing is as good as we could get it. Okay, so this drill is from the 50s era. I would say it's early, mid, and probably into the late 50s. Some variant of this drill would have been made, and it was a common tool for manufacturing. A lot of these were used in assembly lines. Famously, Henry Ford was responsible for a variant of this being made a long time ago, and this is kind of a spin-off of that. It's a modernized version. So let's run this thing and see how it runs. You can see inside there we got our brushes seated well. There's not a lot of sparking or anything like that. If you notice, as we run the drill, it might sound like the pitch is changing. These old drills actually need to warm up. There's fairly thick grease in them, and it needs to get spun around to get working. So we're going to run it a little bit here, and we'll see about what RPM we can get out of this thing. Okay, we've run her a little bit, gave her a chance to percolate, and we're going to take our 7/8 socket and chuck it up here with a socket adapter in our freshly rebuilt Jacobs chuck. And we are going to make sure that's seated properly. We're going to go ahead and tighten that with our chuck key so it doesn't go flying. That's never fun. Okay, so we are going to use our Veeder root tachometer. You've seen this on the channel quite a bit. We fixed this thing a long time back, and it's been serving us well. And let's see what RPMs we get out of this thing. Okay, so we're right around 1490 RPM. I would say if we let this thing warm up, we'd probably evenly get 1500. And if you notice, when we started, it was much lower. We gained 100 RPM and just letting it run a little bit. It kind of talks to how these old tools are just kind of finicky. They're not smooth and right to it like the modern tools are. These things needed to warm up a little bit and they start running better and everything like that. There's a bit that goes along with using these old tools. The gear case is actually getting some heat in it right now as the tool warms up. So there's a few things that go with these if you do want to go and use them and have some fun with them. These motors are not the highest torque because they're going pretty quick. I mean, 1400 RPM doesn't sound like a lot now, but this is geared. You saw how this goes together. There's the gear that comes out and there's a bigger bull gear here, and all the grease needs to get going, and the motor isn't super high torque. It's an old universal motor. This drill is not at all directional. It is one direction. It's not variable speed. Now, something that guys used to do years ago for variable speed, they would throttle the trigger of the drill in order to get the speed they needed if the drill was going too fast. Generally speaking, what you would do with manufacturing, you would order the drill speed you needed. So you would have 1/4 inch sizes, there'd be speeds, and then 5/16, 3/8, 5/8, 1/2 inch, 3/4, 7/8, 3/4, all the way up to 1.25 inches. You'd have Morse tapers in there, of course, but you ordered the size drill you needed for the speed. Each drill would have a different gear set in it, and that's how you would have the speeds. The base drill was basically identical up to a size range. To go along with that, this is a HS-114. This is almost an identical drill to the S-114 here that we've restored. The main difference being that this one is a 2500 RPM drill. If you look here on the plate, 2500 RPM, HS-114. This is almost an identical drill, but it would go faster. This is a future project that we'll be doing on the channel. We'll be cleaning everything up. I don't know if I'll go high polished on this one just because it's so original and it's really not beaten all up. It's actually in really good original condition. We'll just clean everything up, put new grease in it, inspect the bearings, do the whole internal work over on it. Maybe we'll varnish the internals, we'll see. But this will probably be a future project on the channel. But you can see these two drills, to look at them, they're basically identical. This has the Jacobs 1B chuck. This one has the 7B. We may or may not upgrade this chuck on this one. We'll see. I'll try and figure out if this is an original chuck or somebody just threw it on there. So in the restoration of this tool, we took her all apart, and you'll see I'll post some photos maybe of it torn down a little bit further than we had in our previous video excerpt. And we just tore it completely apart, cleaned everything up. These are a little tricky because they weren't split clamshells yet in this era. So the switch and everything has to come out of this top plate. And that can be a little quirky. But it's doable. You just need to have some patience. The clamping system for these is a little bit finicky. This isn't technically the right cord. It's an adapted cord from a later model, but it works out well. These are D-handle drills, which is where the H. Peterson drill started. It was a D-handle style drill. The pistol grip drills didn't come in till later, although this is a hole shooter, and the later pistol grip style was also a hole shooter. We had a video in the Old School Cool series a little while back that was a pistol grip style, high speed, I think it was 5,000 RPM, 1/4 inch drill for manufacturing. That was a pretty cool one to work on. We did that one a while back, and you can see it up here. Overall, these are super fun tools to get into and work on. They're very serviceable. They were meant to work on and repair. This tool is 70 years old or so, and it still works relatively close to the day that it was made. because they're not super high torque, these smaller tools can be damaged if you really have high expectations that you're going to treat it like a modern cordless drill. I'm hoping to do some stuff on the channel in the future to talk about how drills kind of evolved over time, and that the duty cycle in the normal modern tool, while it may be short, allows you much higher torque and everything else with the three-phase motors that are now in drills over these old universal motors. These would run all day, every day, within their parameters, and they would do it for a long time. But once you start pushing them outside of what their design parameters are, you're not going to be happy with these tools. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Old School Cool. We took a look at an S-114. That is a pretty old drill. This thing has seen some stuff over the years. It'd be great to hear stories from it, what it's done and where it's worked. These things were production tools used in manufacturing, and they did their job. I really enjoy restoring these old tools. Let me know in the comments below if you have an S-114, if it's this version or one of the other versions that we've done on the channel. We still have one or two more S-114s we can take a look at. Overall, these are great tools. They still have use in them. If you want to play around in the shop, they're fun to use. Let me know in the comments below any old stories you have of these things, anecdotes, fun projects that you used one on, family members you used them with, work mentors, things like that. I love hearing all that stuff. Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching and have a great day.